Members are stuck in traffic, and so we're going to, let's see what time it is. A couple of minutes at least to give them a chance to get here. We have a couple areas on our interstates that are shut down, so I'm getting calls from committee members trying to get here. We're trying to give them just a little bit of a chance to do that. Can go ahead and make a couple of announcements. We're getting towards the 28th day, which is our new crossover day, so things start moving fast, so pay attention to our bulletin board and your announcements as things change and come up, and you can always call our office too as well. I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, and Representative Harden will open us with a prayer, please. 19? Okay.
All right, let us pray. Father in heaven, we come to you this morning. First of all, Father, just to praise your holy name for your many blessings toward us. Father, for the opportunities that you give us to serve you and the people of this state of Georgia. Father, we pray for all those who are present here today, and we pray that you would guide these discussions. These things we pray in your most holy name. Amen.
Amen. I will call on my environmental quality chairman and for your committee report.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. The Subcommittee on Environmental Quality submits the following recommendations. A recommendation of do pass for House Resolution 281, Representative Fry, and a recommendation of do pass by committee substitute by House Bill 271. Representative Pickett.
Thank you. And I've already spoken to Representative Fry. If you will present House Resolution 281 and go ahead and sit at the desk, that might be easier for you too. How did you get here? Walk on top of them or just?
I saw that in front of the pack, but it really it took forever. I hope everybody's okay now. This
What we'll do now is entertain questions from our committee. And so if you have a question, punch your button for me. But number 9, if you'll say your name and then ask your question.
Thank you. I'm Representative Pat Gardner from Atlanta. I wanted to make sure I had the right copy of the bill, LC 1378.
no, ma'am. This is House Resolution 281 with LC 4013. Oh yeah, 1378. Sorry.
I was testing your eyesight.
That's not fair.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Then, yeah, what? All right, punch your button for me, please. Number 25.
Motion, if I may.
All right, yes.
I move that we do pass.
Is there a second? Second, okay. Any further discussion on this bill? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Representative Fry, you have your bill. Your next process is to go to the Rules Committee. They have forms for you to fill out, such as that. All right, thank you. So next up is House Bill 271, and that is Representative Petrie. And we do need you to state to us your LC number, because I think that bill's had a few generations.
LC 401467S.
Thank you. Everybody check and be sure they have that one. That's the one we'll be working on. And we've already had a recommendation for the subcommittee for your bill, so catch your breath and we'll give you a second to get things lined up.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. No, thank you so much, and members of the committee. I have Spud Woodward with me today to help me answer any questions that may be beyond my ability to answer, although I think I've done a pretty good job so far in subcommittee. But at any rate, we bring you today House Bill 271. This bill amends the Shore Protection Act of 1979, which was enacted for the purpose of protecting the sand sharing system on the Bear Island of Georgia. sailed along our shore. Thank you, that's better. And, but at any rate, the 4 islands that do have substantive populations today include Tybee Island, Sea Island, St. Simons, and Jekyll. And those islands have had human populations for centuries, quite frankly. And so at any rate, the improvement to the act that we seek today is to improve the method of defining the landward boundary of the jurisdiction of the Shore Protection Act. The current method is archaic, and it's based on the presence of 20-foot or taller native trees or pre-1979 structures. And so the current method leaves many sensitive areas. And Spud, are we going to show some of that today here? We can, if we need to. We can show you photographs. So the current method leaves very sensitive areas of the sand sharing system unprotected altogether. And meanwhile, it places many private property owners who are well removed from the shoreline and the sand sharing system themselves in jurisdiction. And so we have a method today that creates an unnecessary regulatory burden on too many property owners and leaves too many dunes themselves unprotected. So the current problem we're trying to solve, there's absolutely no uniformity or predictability for citizens or for regulators. And so this bill is drafted, and I think that most of you have, you should have this information before you with some photographs of the 3 different examples I'm going to show you in a moment about where we're going to draw the line. But let me first tell you the purpose of this bill is to accomplish 3 very broad goals. Number 1, to provide predictability and uniformity for property owners. I just pointed out they do not have that today. This bill is going to give them that. Number 2, to provide a law that is more easily enforced by our regulatory agencies. And number 3, and make no mistake, this bill will provide better protection for the sand sharing system than the current law. Now, there are folks that are going to want to make it even better and even better and even better, but make no mistake, this bill will accomplish those 3 goals, the third of which is to make this enforcement and the protection of this coast better than it is today. So, to accomplish these goals, this bill changes the method that I just pointed to earlier, the archaic method we use today. It changes the method of establishing the jurisdictional line for the SPA, and the new line would be established as follows in one of 3 ways. And I think, Tim and I think you all have the 3 examples before you. There's some photographs there that I think are very helpful. Very helpful. So, number 1, a line 25 feet landward from the landwardmost toe of the most landward sand dunes. Number 2, a 25-foot line from the crest of a shoreline or stabilization structure. Now, I need to emphasize that overwhelmingly, you're going to have one of those 2 scenarios. The third scenario is a very rare occurrence on the barrier islands, and that is where you have neither of the 2 I just mentioned. And in that scenario, you would have a 20-foot line landward from the ordinary high water mark. So, I need to emphasize something real strongly here. This jurisdictional line for the Shore Protection Act is not a building setback. I need you to hear that loud and clear. It is not a building setback. On the coast, our local communities and indeed authorities like the Jekyll Island Authority have the ability to set their own building setbacks. We do that on Tybee, we do that in Chatham County. Everybody has a right locally to set their own building setbacks. This bill was created to protect the sand sharing system, and that's what we're going to make sure we do here. So, finally, a couple of other so that's the jurisdictional line. There's a couple of other things this bill will do. It will create something we don't have today, a minor activity category in the Act to expedite the review process and reduce the regulatory burden on our citizens who are seeking minor alterations on their private property, such as landscaping, building a deck, building a porch. Right now, they have to go through a cumbersome process to have the state approve those kind of minor alterations. So we want to make a process where simple, small things can be more easily expedited and approved by the state. Last issue, I think it's real important. We had some conversation on this. I want to point out this bill will allow for the transfer of Shore Protection Act permits from to new owners, and that's very important as well. So in summary, this bill does not weaken the protection of the sand sharing system on the coast, and indeed, it will improve it, while at the same time lessen the regulatory burden on coastal citizens and improving the ability of the department, who is here today, to and can profess this as well, improving their ability to enforce the act. That is the intent of this law. Those are the goals. I hope, Madam Chair, I've explained that well, and I'm glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Representative. At this time, it is the right time for our legislators to ask questions, members of the committee too. Please keep in mind our different members are going to want to have the opportunity to speak as well, so limit your questions to one question as we go around the room and give others a chance. So I have number 10 and then number 11.
Representative, thank you for your work on this. I agree we need to protect our coast, and I'm not opposed to that at all. I do have a question that's been bothering me since the beginning of this.
Sure.
I know that there was a study done by one of our colleges and universities, and it came back with different numbers. It was 50-50, 150 instead of the 25-25-25. And I know that it was alluded to in December in the budget hearings by the commissioner of DNR when he said we'd be bringing forth this legislation. I know that the whole idea behind this is that we want to protect our dunes and we want to be behind the stabilizations so that there's protection for not only sand sharing, but also there's some human and property rights protection in all of this from storms. Mm-hmm. So my question is, why did we back off the 50-50, 150 to 25-25-25?
Well, I'll answer that. Thank you, Representative, and I appreciate the very good question. And I'll answer it, and then if Spud would like to add, he can as well, speaking for the department. Here's what we have. The goal of this bill is to bring balance. To pass a bill here today, we've got to be able to balance the two sides. And my understanding is that although there are folks that would certainly rather it be 50 or 100 or 150, Lord, I've got folks emailing me wanting it. I think they'd rather us not live on an island at all. And so we have to bring balance to this. My understanding is that to get the bill passed and to accomplish all those goals I just set out, we knew that to go beyond 25 feet was going to make it untenable and impossible to pass the bill. This land that we are impacting in this jurisdictional zone belongs to the citizens who own these properties on the coast. This is a property rights issue, and to take 50 feet of that land and to make it subject to state approval for them to do all of these, anything that they might want to do in it, was going to be untenable to pass. That is my answer, and then Spud, would you like to add anything to that?
I can certainly. That's the explanation. We came before this body in 2013, some of you will remember, and simply put, there was no appetite for having a jurisdictional area that was going to be of that size. I mean, that bill basically just withered, and so it would have been fruitless of the department to have come forward with a bill that we knew was going to be unacceptable. So we think that this is a reasonable. Again, this is a area of regulatory interest, and this bill puts that area of regulatory interest in proximity to the sand sharing system, which is what it was designed to protect.
Madam Chair, could I follow up with just a quick question of clarity?
But please keep in mind that I have several lights flashing here.
Yes,
okay?
ma'am. I just wanted to clarify that this is not like a buffer where you cannot build within that footage. You do have to get a permit, but you are not prohibited from building within that 25 feet, 50 feet, whatever.
That is correct, but also the law as written right now specifies you cannot encroach into more than 2/3 of the jurisdictional area. So the size of it does have bearing on what you can do with your property, because the larger the area, then the 2/3 rule starts to have more of an effect. So yes, it is not a no build, but it does require the Shore Protection Committee to evaluate what you're proposing to do and to determine whether that activity will have an unreasonable impact on the sand sharing system.
Thank you.
Representative, just to repeat something I said earlier, but I want to emphasize it again because I think it's necessary. As Spud just said, it's not a no build. Remember, those local communities will establish their setback as they deem fit. They always have the authority and the right to do that.
Thank you. And my next number I saw is number 11. If you'll say your name and ask your question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Deborah Bazemore, State Representative, District 63. My question is, I heard you speak to the pros. Are there any cons with relationship to this passing? And if
No.
so, what are they?
No, ma'am. This is a win-win-win. This bill is good for property owners. It is good for the regulatory agencies. They can better enforce it, and it further protects our coastline. There is no lose here. This is a win-win-win. Absolutely. Thank you. Good question, Representative.
Thank you.
Thank you. And my next question is number 23.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and that's a great segue to my question. On lines 45, 46, and 47, we seem to be making a clear redefinition of sand dune.
Yes.
And we're creating, is it not true that we're creating just a tremendous opening for trial lawyers and for dispute among our existing statutes? For example, we have, I'm reading from Tybee Island Marine Center, it's prohibited to walk on the dunes and is punishable with fines up to $1,000. But the way I'm reading this, and this may be that I've spent the entire session in judiciary non-civil, and so it's made me a little loose in the head, but the way I'm reading
That
this...
is an illness. But
Yeah,
anyway, go on.
yeah. I'm gonna need therapy after this, but basically mounds and dunes are interchangeable in common definition. So if this is litigated, mounds and dunes are interchangeable. I know, and I don't want to get to my question, I guess, is have we not created a huge loophole that I believe will kill this bill?
Representative, I'm going to let Spud speak to that, but let me first say this. The purpose of further defining, and then I'll let Spud answer more appropriately, the purpose of defining the sand dunes was to avoid that which you just spoke to. So the department felt like it needed a clearer definition. You know, again, as I pointed out earlier, the lack of the ambiguity and the lack of clarity in the current process is one of the biggest challenges for the department. And so this was actually an attempt to have a better defined dune so that we could avoid just what you spoke to. But again, Spud, you take it.
Right, that's correct. Sand dunes are defined geologically, commonly, but this defines sand dunes for the context of this law. So that when our staff has to go on the ground and look at a upland sand sharing system interface, they will know what a sand dune is in the context of this law in order to determine what is the landward-most sand dunes. So we think this is clarifying and certainly eliminates some ambiguity that would have led to the very situation you described.
One follow-up? Brief.
Yes, go ahead.
There was a reference to intercoastal dunes in the subcommittee hearing, the prehistoric dunes that exist in Georgia. The fall line dunes, I think, was the sponsor's reference. Wouldn't it be smarter to have a reference from the shore so that it would exclude the fall line dunes clearly, but yet not create this tremendous ambiguity that's in the bill now?
Well, we believe that does that. That the way it is defined now, it does not open the door for looking at dunes that are not really functionally primary and secondary dunes that are actively part of the sand sharing system. So we're comfortable that it will do what you described. It will not lead us into a challenge based on where tertiary dunes, remnant dunes, prehistoric dunes, that sort of thing.
Thank you. Number 9.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, Representative Pat Gardner. I'm not an expert in this area, but I really have 2 questions. And one is to think about, I understand the importance of the department needing to have some clear guidelines and homeowners needing to understand what the guidelines are. That seems important to me. But it's also interesting to think about it in terms of who really determines these things, and it's hard to imagine that Mother Nature is really as predictable as we would like her to be. But when you talk about a balance between 50 and 25, what's the balance between 25 and something other? Is the something other nothing?
Pat, I guess the best way I can answer that, I think the balance that I'm seeking is that which we can accomplish here that will be an improvement to those 3 groups. I'm looking for something that's that win-win-win I spoke to, and I believe the balance is that is, I felt like that is what we could accomplish, and in conversation with the department, that was what we could accomplish.
So the balance is between private property owner. Does this only apply to private property, not to the islands that are owned by the state or the federal government?
Absolutely not. As we pointed out, as I pointed out earlier, we have 10 barrier islands that aren't even developed, and some of them are privately owned, but so many of them in my district alone, I've got Wausau and Ossabal that are just owned by the feds or the state, and so we're not really worried about those. Those are going to be protected. There's no question, forever, and that's a good thing.
Forever, you think? Well, I visited them,
certain.
and they are treasures. I agree. We just hate to see our shoreline be reduced.
Thank you. And number 16.
Thank you, and I appreciate you bringing this bill. I know this is a tough issue, and I know that Spud and his folks on the coast, their primary interest is protecting our coastline and protecting our dunes. But wanted to just make sure, clarify something. Received a lot of emails concerning the idea of going to 150 feet, and I just want to make sure I'm correct in saying this. When you're trying to balance private property rights, if we went to 150 feet, which gives more protection, but these individuals we would be affecting, that's 150 feet, and then in addition to that, you have setbacks that the local communities can put in place. We would make many people's property at that point unbuildable and unusable. But isn't it also true that those same individuals who are private property owners would continue to have to pay their property taxes on that property because they still own it, even though we're putting that protection in place?
Representative Tanner, you're absolutely right. They continue to pay the same property taxes on that land that is in the jurisdictional zone, whether they can use it or not. And by the way, I've received those same emails, most of them from out of this state, by people who aren't concerned about private property owners who live on this property that they own on the coast, but only see it one-sided. We're trying to be balanced here, and we believe the 25, again, listen, if the Jekyll Island Authority wants a 150-foot setback, they can do so. If the people of any of our coastal counties or communities want to set back 150 feet, they can do so. But the state should not burden our citizens any more than we should to do what we must do to protect the sand sharing system. That's what this bill was created for. And the experts, I'm not an expert, I'm a businessman. The experts believe that this 25 feet jurisdictional line will do just that.
Madam Chair, I don't have a question, but I'd like to make a comment to the committee just for consideration. One of the things I think it's important that we keep in mind is we have to strike a balance of protecting our environment, but we also have to be careful and keep in mind that all of these individuals are private property owners that have purchased this property. And any point that the government feels that it needs to take more than what is reasonable, in my opinion, then there needs to be compensation for that. So I think that DNR has done a good job of protecting our coast, but we have to be careful that we do not legislate the taking of private property rights without compensation, and I think that's important to keep in mind. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I have question number 10 and then 12. But briefly, the chair, I believe it was Representative Nimmer who did a walkout for me of footage. Your stride was 3 feet. Will you walk the room for us so we can see what 50-25 looks like right now? You up to it? Yeah, just start walking. I think this room is about 50 feet. I think most people are mathematically challenged. No, it is for real. I think
She's
most
serious,
people do not understand 25 feet, 50 feet, or anything like that. So let's have a visual of what we're talking about.
Madam Chair.
I owe you a great deal of thanks for this. But anyway, let's just see.
Madam Chair, I think you really surprised him on this one.
Well, I've
I
been
don't
trying
think he
to
was
for
prepared
years,
for this.
so no. Yeah. We can, yes, let's just make that the first, okay? So what is that, 21? You said? So right at 21. So if you continue on, we might hit 30. This room is the depth of 30 then. That's your length of the room. So take this room and go to 50, and then hit 75, then hit 100, hit 125, then hit 150, and you are almost across the street. So I think that people have a hard time with concept of length and what we're talking about. So I will definitely buy you a Coca-Cola later. So thank you for the demo. Number 10.
Thank you, Representative Nimmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of things. One is that I too have received the 200 emails, and the 150 was not for anything but the ordinary high water mark, which is where there are no sand dunes and there's no shore stabilization. And there are only a very few spots that have that configuration. And the best one I know is the drift, where all the driftwood is on Jekyll, down near where the dock is. But in reference to the tax, I checked on that, and there is currently in the Georgia Code, where fair market value is established, upon which our taxes are based, a section that says if there are restrictions placed on the land, then the fair market value can reflect that by reducing the property value for taxes. So, this is not necessarily for the 150 at the ordinary high water mark. We're not really talking, I don't think, is my question. Is it not true that there aren't houses in those places where we're talking about the ordinary high water mark measure? Is that correct?
There actually are some on Jekyll right now on the north end, because they have a non-functional rock revetment. So the ocean is overtopping that rock revetment, which is scheduled to be repaired by the Jekyll Island Authority. But right now, the ordinary high water mark would be the reference point. So if you went 150 feet, you would encompass probably 4 or 5 rows of structures.
And it would obviously go across the road as well?
It wouldn't go completely across the street. This would be on the very north end, up by Villas by the Sea. But what it would mean is that all those structures, so if somebody wanted to come in and build a porch on one of those structures that was 3 or 4 rows back from the ordinary high water mark, then they have to come get a permit from the Shore Protection Committee. And that's the very thing we're trying to avoid, is interfering with somebody's ability to use their private property when it has no bearing on that sand sharing system. So, that's the only really situation I know of where there's actually structures built within that distance of the ordinary high water mark. Because most of the time, those kind of properties, people are not building on them anyway. They're erosional shorelines, and they choose to not do that because it's unwise to do so. But this case is unique because there was a rock revetment. It's not functional, so it's overtopping So the bank is basically being cut by the ocean, but that will be fixed whenever Jekyll Island, repairs the rock revetment, backfills the rock revetment with beach quality sand, builds a dunescape, and then that'll eliminate that particular problem. So
But when those
Pardon me?
sorry, when those rock
No,
revetments
as the
are-
chair, if you can
May I-
continue.
May I follow up? I'm sorry.
Yes.
So when there's not a rock revetment in other places and there aren't houses, then the bigger buffer might be in order?
that is
For protection
that
of-
is a decision that this body would have to make in terms of how you want to affect people's private property. And the department believes that a 25-foot zone of regulatory interest is adequate for the Shore Protection Committee to be able to determine whether those activities are going to be unreasonably, deleterious to the sand sharing system.
Thank you. Then number 12.
Thank you. Good morning. Carla Drenner from DeKalb. Just a couple comments. I understand that the area that you're talking about, the 25 feet, and it encompasses a fair amount of property. However, the comment that you made about the property taxes, I just wonder why that problem hasn't been addressed in a separate provision instead of this way, because it seems to me like if that's the overarching problem that you're trying to address, that you should be in, Ways and Means and not here to.
Representative, I'm sorry, I don't think I understand.
Well, you're talking. What I heard you say was that people are being taxed by property that they can't use.
Yeah, I was responding to Representative Tanner's, he asked the question and I responded affirmatively that if indeed someone is encumbered from building on that property, they are still paying taxes on the property. That is accurate.
So if that's the case, then why don't you introduce a bill that would actually address that particular concern?
Well, perhaps that may be something to address one day, but that was not the purpose of this bill. Was to protect the coast, give regulators a better ability to protect the coast, and to make private property owners protected from egregious and overburdensome regulation. The bill you just alluded to would not do either of those three things. So this is the mission we're on today. That may be an issue we take going forward, because by the way, we also encumber our private property owners in this state's ability to build on the marsh. And so there are plenty of folks that would say, if I can't use all of my backyard because it's on the marsh, that I shouldn't be paying the full price tag for the value of that lot. But to my knowledge, that hasn't been addressed yet. It might be a good idea going forward. Maybe we need to work on that. But that's unrelated to, quite frankly, in my opinion, unrelated to this bill.
Well,
The chair has a comment here. We have the room until 9 o'clock. And so I have 3 more numbers. I think they are repeat numbers. So if you have another question, make it very brief and then
can I follow up, Madam Chair? Just
briefly,
real quick.
please.
So the balance that you've alluded to, between 25 and 150 feet, that's the range that I've heard you refer to. Wouldn't the balance be 50 instead of 25?
Yeah, Representative Jenner, with the balance that I believe and the department, who are the experts, believe, the balance I'm seeking is that between private property owners and the protection of the coast. I believe that balance concretely is 25 feet. And that is what the experts, the department who's sitting here beside me, the experts believe that gives us the ability to protect the coast. So what I alluded to earlier was that we have people that they believe that it's 150 feet or 50 feet or 100 feet. That's not the balance that I believe. So, but again, you got people that believe any number of things. So I wasn't suggesting that the balance should be between 0 and 150. I was alluding to the comments that are coming, and everybody's got their opinion. We believe, I believe, and the department, again, the experts believe, that we can better protect our coast with this bill, which is 25 feet.
Thank you.
I hope that answers your question, and thank you, Representative.
Thank you. Very briefly now, number 16, then number 23, then number 8. Thank you.
Madam Chair, for the sake of time, I'll wait.
All right, thank you. Number 23. There you go.
Madam Chair, thank you. And maybe the Legislative Council who drafted lines 45, 46, and 47 could weigh in on 47, the word stabilized. And I'm getting back to enforcement. I really think we're creating a loophole here that's unenforceable, but I'm not the lawyer, so maybe, you know, the word stabilized means something specific, because right now it just seems to be a really, really vague term that we're introducing here having to do with dunes. And I don't know if that's appropriate, Madam Chair, but if it is, I'd love to hear what he has to say about it.
Let me do this first, and I know we work with different attorneys, but Spud with the coastal, can you explain that? Because you had attorneys on the bill as well, is that correct?
Right. You know, again, it's setting a definition for the context of this bill, and we have to give our staff some reasonable discretion to go out and analyze the unique characteristics of every upland sand sharing system interface. And we know if we go to a dune that has wax myrtles and salt cedar and scrub oaks and things like that, that is a stabilized dune. The root mats have stabilized it. The sand is not exchanging with the other parts of the dune. So we know for the purposes of administrating this what stabilized means. Does this mean somebody couldn't come challenge us? I would dare say y'all have never promulgated anything that was as ironclad that it couldn't be challenged. You know, I mean, somebody can challenge anything. But I think we have specified this to the point that we can make a reasonable defense of any determination we make in the field.
Thank you. And then number 8.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And my question kind of goes back to the question that Representative Buckman asked. Because let me put it like this. Usually when we are in this particular committee, and it's just been, it's not a formal a situation, but it's like usually the community, the environmental community and others, you sort of have some working together and come up with a compromise. But it seems like in this particular bill, it's almost as if I don't see, it hadn't been in the room, too much room for compromise. But one thing that Representative Buckner said was that she was apprised of a fact that the commissioner mentioned something about 50 feet, but when the bill came up, it's 25 feet. And even though it was asked, I don't think it was a real answer to how did you move from, or was it a misspeak? Because there's some information that says that it was a 50 feet, and now we're at 25, 25, and no compromise.
Right. Representative, thank you for the question. First of all, I would emphasize that the commissioner doesn't pass bills here. That's our job, and our job is to evaluate what we think we can do for the best interest of the people. And
so are you saying that the department?
If I could finish.
Not correct. Let him finish his answer,
Okay.
Representative.
If I could finish.
Then I will recognize you next.
And so furthermore, I actually want to remind you that to suggest that we haven't worked with environmental groups is inappropriate and is inaccurate, moreover. So we've had conversations with everybody well before this bill was dropped, and we have organizations like the Nature Conservancy that support this bill, as you've heard in testimony before here, in its current form. So we have environmental groups that absolutely support this bill, and because they understand that this brings balance. Listen, at the end of the day, here's what we got. We can either let the perfect be the enemy of the good, or we can do something to move this state forward. This bill's 50 years old. It's archaic. It needs to be improved. We need to make it better for the people who live on the coast, like I have and my ancestors have forever. And we can make it better for our people. We can make it better for regulatory agencies to be more enforceable. And we can make it better to protect the coast. It will not be perfect, because we're not going to get perfect here. And so there may have been some language about what might have been perfect. But that's not what we're here to do the best we can to make things better for Georgia and to make good policy for Georgia. This bill does that, in my opinion, and that's about the only way I can answer that. But I appreciate the question.
Thank you. At this point in time, did you have another?
Yeah, well,
Briefly, please,
okay,
Representative.
all right. Okay, well, I appreciate it. I did hear the Georgia Conservatives say that they would like a change, but if it did not change, then they would be okay with it. So I did hear that. Well, let me ask you this: as it relates to a property owned by the state, what are the law footage in terms of that property that's owned by the state, President?
I'll let Mr. Woodward answer that.
I mean, this law would apply uniformly across private and state property, just like the Marsh Buffer law applies uniformly across state and private property.
So you wouldn't necessarily.
Pardon me?
Okay, yes.
Through the chair.
Madam Chair, can I just follow?
Yes.
So in other words, you would, since it belongs to the state and the issue of property rights in terms of people paying taxes on won't be an issue, would you be open to at least the property that's owned by the state having a more, like maybe instead of 25 feet, 50 feet, since there's no property rights issue besides because we as the state own the property? Because I have a
No, I would dare say there would definitely be a property rights issue because a lot of state property is leased by private individuals for their use, like the example being Jekyll Island. And so if you had regulations that were more stringent, then it would definitely affect those individuals' private use of state property. So it's a complicated situation. But as Representative Petrie's already said, you know, the Jekyll Island Authority, if they wanted to promulgate an ordinance that was more restrictive, they certainly have the ability to do that. They cannot be more liberal than state law, but they can certainly be more restrictive than state law if they determine that was in the best interest of that state property.
Thank you, Representative. I now have number 21.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know we've vetted this bill through multiple subcommittees, and at the appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion to do pass.
That's an appropriate motion at this time. All right, it has to be due pass by committee substitute. You okay with that? All right.
Yes, do pass.
And there's a second. All right, any further discussion? Yes.
If we are a member of this committee, but we are not a member of a subcommittee, we cannot offer an amendment at that subcommittee. I'd like to know if this is the appropriate time for me as a member of the full committee to offer an amendment to the bill.
Thank you for that question. Do you have it written and able to hand out to committee members?
I do.
Okay. The chair, let me read rule number 7 to you, because although my committee members are not members of both committees, they have a right to ask a member on that committee to represent their amendment at that point in time. So we're not limiting our committee members to have interaction, but we do have 2 separate committees. But rule number 7, it's been ruled for several years, to allow maximum time for consideration, amendments to any measure assigned to the committee should be introduced in the subcommittee to which the chairperson has referred the measure. I know this is a contentious issue for some people. Representative Bucker, I will allow it, but out of courtesy to your chair, I should have received that well in advance of this meeting, and that did not happen. So I'm making an exception of this case because I feel like it's an important issue. We have a motion and a second on the bill. I can accept an amendment at this time, so you're free to make that amendment, but please, in the future, follow our protocol.
I apologize, Madam Chair, and I appreciate your lenience. There have been so many emails, and this is such a contentious time in the public where people don't feel like public officials
Please
are
make
listening
your
to
amendment.
citizens. And so the amendment just adds a section B, and it would add that for property that is owned by the state, and it just changes from 25, 25, 25 to the 50, 50, 150 that was in the study that was commissioned by the department and was quoted from earlier in the process. And I have copies if you'd like for me to.
And I hope you do realize that this is not giving our committee members time to review. Okay, but go ahead, I'm allowing it. We have someone who can hand it out. So what the committee is in this posture right now. These amendments are being handed out. At that point in time, I will entertain a motion on that amendment. We will either do pass or not pass on that amendment. So please, if someone can help her hand out these amendments, we are running out of time.
Madam Chair, this 150 would apply to less than 3 miles of the coast, and And it just applies to state-owned property. So anything that anybody wanted to do on private property would fall under the rules and regs that they're talking about, the 25, 25, 25.
Thank you. Number 22?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question for the chairman. Is
Yeah.
is a motion to table appropriate at this point in time and allow?
It is, but the chair is not recognizing that. I think we need to either vote for or against this amendment because I think it's an important issue. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, Mr. Woodward has a comment he would
All
like to
right.
make to the committee
Please.
regarding the amendment.
Yeah, I heard a motion in a second.
Representative Buckner referenced a study that was commissioned that had recommendations for 50, 50, and 150, and I'm not familiar with that. I mean,
You're not familiar either with
We
that.
have a study that was obviously done by Dr. Jackson, and it talked about possible scenarios of shoreline migration, but
There were no specific recommendations for distances in there, to my knowledge.
So.
That's just what I was told by someone.
All right,
Well,
all
that-
right, thank you. We're not going to debate back and forth. At this point in time, we will either do a yes or no vote on this amendment. So all those in favor of this amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. The noes clearly have it. We now move forward to the full bill. All those in favor of, let me get the right, House Bill 271, what's our, trying to find it, LC 401467S. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay.
Nay.
Thank you. We will reflect that in our minutes. And Representative, you have your bill. Your next process is to take it to the rules for their process. Thank you, and thank you for
Madam
your
Chair.
patience here. I also want to commend this committee and the members in the room. We were able to follow legislative procedure on the bill, even though it's a contentious bill. Thank you.